Based on the synopsis of an unproduced miniseries. Depth. 2012, Hungary, Sziget Festival. I'm only 11. My father and I are lying in a tent, and I'm gazing through the mosquito net at a bright star. I shake my head, and the distant celestial body turns into a glowing droplet. It rolls across the fabric. In the neighboring campsite, there's drunken muttering, while a sense of calm creeps up on me after my hysterical crying. A hornet stung my hand when I turned on the flashlight. I guess it didn't like the light. My dad managed to get some insect bite spray and an allergy pill from our neighbors. In the morning, we'll move our camp away from the tree where, as it turns out, there's a nest of hornets. Dad assured me that while we sleep, no hornet will get to us. I believed him. Maybe it was the antihistamine that brought this calmness, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life, and it will always be associated with my dad, who when he wakes up, thinks about me. He finds a corner of peace for my anxious mind. Someone crunches branches near our tent again, and I can no longer distinguish between dreams and reality. This isn't that creepy sleep paralysis adults experience. This is my personal show, where everything around turns into scenery, and I become part of an interactive fairy tale. The fairy tale continued the next day. It rained, the ground softened, and I felt a special connection to it, as my rubber boots squelched and clung to the clay. I also felt connected to the sky. The raindrops pelted my raincoat for hours. Then there was a rainbow, bright like in a Skittles commercial. By evening, everything dried quickly. And now, in my memory, there's strong tea made on a gas burner, bread with Nutella, and a placebo concert. We push through the crowd to the music with my dad. He holds my hand. People make way for us. I hear this band for the first time and don't understand why my body is covered in goosebumps. 20 years. Hundreds of lighters sway in the field. I feel a tingling at the bottom of my eyes, and within a second, tears break free. There's no reason to cry, but I watch the dancing spotlights through a thin film of tears. My father notices my emotions, but says nothing. His hand rests on my back, the bitter end. I jump on my father's shoulders and look at the dancing people from above. There are so many. I clearly remember some of the faces, their clothes, their movements. I raised my hands and waved to them. In return, I got smiles. They were all different there, fairy tale-like. My brother Johann returned from an IT camp at the end of August, a couple of days before my birthday. I missed him a lot, but it seemed like he missed me less. Over the summer, his friend list grew by 40 people, and on my birthday, which we celebrated at a bowling alley, none of the invited guests could make it. But Johann's new friends came. They were all smart and interesting in some way. For the first time, I felt an alternate life that could exist outside our incomplete family. Overall, it was fun, but I felt a bit uneasy. Just one camp session, and my brother had grown up. He had a different vibe. Of course, the age difference explained a lot. Later, he would tell me that he invited his friends so I wouldn't be lonely. He threw a request in the chat for them to join us, and the guys responded. Naturally, I compared myself to Johann. It was inevitable. There was no escaping it. Dad keenly understood my vulnerability. He silently conveyed to me that he loved me, and that worked in the moment. I remember Johann and Dad sitting in the living room with their laptops while I drove a remote-controlled car on the floor. It buzzed annoyingly. Dad would take breaks from his screen to tell me about the game he was developing. He tried to engage me without any pushiness or coddling. Zoom. The car crashes into Dad's leg. He looks up at me, not sternly, with warmth. as if his blue eyes are asking, "What can I do for you?" And I have no answer, just attempts echoing mysteriously within me, and that echo makes me uneasy. Competing with Johann was exhausting. Maybe that's why our interests gradually diverged. I no longer said I wanted to join an IT class, that I wanted to be a programmer or a game designer. I said I would be a rock star. In the fall, Dad gave me an electric guitar. For no reason, he just came to my room and handed it to me. I remember how carefully he handled the instrument. With a certain reverence, he unzipped it, sat on the edge of my bed, and adjusting the tuning pegs, began to timidly pluck the strings. It was unclear who was more excited. Then his strong, slender fingers took a few chords, and I immediately recognized the song "Personal Jesus." I had heard it a few times in the car. Dad quickly fumbled and didn't finish playing. He gently placed the guitar on my lap, as if apologizing for the delay. I felt its weight and instantly realized this wasn't some toy. Later, he would occasionally come in and ask for permission to play. His skill level was below average, but for me, it was already a standard. To say that I diligently took up music would be an exaggeration. All that academic training with an online tutor, to be honest, was unbearable. I even regretted daring to express my desire to become a musician. But I liked having a real guitar and that it could create soaring sounds with the help of a pedal. And then I discovered something strange within myself. Sometimes I would close my eyes, disperse my attention, and a vast abyss would appear before me. In this space, there was no constant gravity. Rare thoughts would erupt from it like from a volcano. You could grab onto some of them like a thread of a web and gently pull them out if they didn't tear. Something flickered in the darkness like shiny wrappers, and a fantastic silence reigned. And sometimes there was nothing at all, and the depth would swallow everything I brought to it. When I was 14, we moved from our apartment to a new private house. It was hidden behind tall thujas. The air in the rooms was always clean and humidified. I loved stepping outside with a glass of juice and watching the sun's rays filter through the dense greenery, scattering warm glimmers on the tiles. By a stroke of luck, there was a creative school nearby. It was an opportunity not to be missed. I attended it for about 3 years, sometimes with pleasure, sometimes not. Dad looked super young and trendy as he reached 40. He had a successful game on popular platforms, several startups, and a steadily growing investment portfolio with cryptocurrency, anticipating a crazy boom. When my brother turns 20, he will officially join my father's development team. I could feel the money flowing into our home, though I wasn't spoiled by it. Everything was simply there, and with each passing year, everything improved. Everything except my mood. Dad had influential friends and colleagues. I crossed paths with their kids. They didn't interest me, and I felt they lacked parental attention. The cruel digital hand of online stores and services dangled them over a mad world where everything was speeding up and becoming accessible with one click. If I were to compare myself with someone again, I'd say I realized that my dad gave each of us more time than any other parent. That was our baseline, cooking dinner in turns instead of ordering takeout. That was also a baseline in our family. Taking care of the lawn, playing board games, visiting grandma together on Sundays, cycling to her place. At the creative school, during my second year, I met Victoria for the first time. The instructor asked me to grab the amp from the dance hall, and there I saw her, playing banks, begging for thread. She was dancing with her back to me, along with 4 other girls. Their movements were synchronized at first, but at the drop, each of them fell into improvisation. Victoria stood out, moving ecstatically. It seemed like she was portraying a wounded bird struggling against the air currents, dragging her to the ground. The black gloves, tightly encasing her forearms, with neat holes for her thumbs, added a special gothic drama, emphasizing every movement of her hands. In the reflections of the large mirrors, I unsuccessfully tried to make out her face. The energy radiating from her body etched a fragile and trembling silhouette into my consciousness, which would later flare up and fade repeatedly in the depth of my mind. I knew we would meet again. I didn't seek out that meeting specifically or hasten it. My preparation was important to me. My bangs, which had long grown below my eyebrows, I began to casually flick back. This gesture gave me confidence. My wardrobe filled with black clothes from designer stores, hoodies, pants, blazers, coats. Everything was minimalist, but some items had a strange cut with slanted slits or deep hoods. I bought a few pairs of new rock boots, probably the most extravagant detail in my new look. For some reason, I was drawn to visual references to goths, even though subcultures were already out of fashion by then. There was something meta-modern about my look. I wanted to pause, to reflect on the decades I had scarcely lived through, while not shying away from new designs, all the upcoming oversized garments with external seams. Victoria is a year older than me. We exchanged messages and went for walks around our neighborhood. In everyday life, she dressed quite ordinarily, which even bothered me a bit. There was nothing mysterious about her behavior. She had a ton of acquaintances and social activities, which also made me uneasy. Once, my father had to give us a ride in his car by chance, and she started talking to him as if he were an old friend. I felt incredibly uncomfortable. I even wanted to reprimand her afterward. But for what? For flirtation that wasn't actually there, but which I thought might have been? For a style of communication that differed from mine? Nonsense. She came to our yard. On the terrace under the infrared heaters, we did our homework or got lost in TV series. I signaled to my family that there was nothing and no prospect of anything between us. But our communication grew closer, and I decided that it was time to move forward. On a clear day, we got on our bikes and went out of town, leaving our sleepy neighborhood behind. The route was not the usual one for a bike ride. We passed logistics centers with European transport companies flashing by. Everything was frozen and deserted like in a game simulation. The only ghostly movement was created by the trucks and electric trains overtaking us. Victoria's hands were freezing, so I gave her my thin gloves. Then we faced a steep climb up a hill and wooden pallets where we could comfortably sit with our legs dangling, looking at the strange landscape. I can't say why I'm mesmerized by this field with irrigation systems that were recently turned off, and the abandoned bridge in the distance. The snow-white wind turbine blades spin hypnotically in the rays of the almost winter sun, and one spins very close, rhythmically casting its shadow over us. Victoria doesn't understand what we're doing here. She looks at the same landscape, seeing nothing special in it, and I sink into my depth and the silence, which seems troubling to her. But it is in this silence that I want to kiss her, hoping that all my accumulated energy in this depth will burst forth and pierce her just as her dance pierced me. Something will ignite, something will change. Our eyes will close and open in another dimension where we will see and feel the same thing. But as soon as I touch her cool lips, she abruptly turns away from me as if I were a stranger. An unpleasant grimace appears on her face. Cringe. I'll come back to this place a few more times alone, wondering whether I scared her with my vibe or whether my failed kiss was so disgusting that it provoked such a reaction. We returned to the city in silence. Everything was as before. We pretended that nothing had happened. She still came over. Sometimes she brought her friends. We played ping pong with my brother's friends and cooked meat on the grill. Johann often drove my father's Tesla. I don't know why they didn't buy him his own car. Everyone was fine with it. I also got my license, but I had to wait until I turned 18 to get behind the wheel. I eagerly awaited that day. I understood that most likely no magic would happen, but perhaps this formality would give me a key to something new. There was no peace in my contentment and satisfaction. The depth kept expanding. It seemed that this living chaos, lurking inside me, had its own will. In dreams or waking life, it constantly whispered that I needed someone who could see what I see, and what I saw were endless patterns of my intertwined thoughts and feelings. And so I close my eyes, scrutinize everything, discover connections, and in words, it turns into meaningless babble, like a dream that seems brilliant and could pass for an Oscar-winning script when told, but turns into complete nonsense. Shutting myself in my room, I would turn off the lights and play the guitar. I invited imaginary spectators into the depth, and they obediently appeared in the darkness. They moved to the rhythm of my dark, psychedelic blues and swayed, some new, unexplored intimacy, without words, thoughts and emotions transmitted straight to the heart. I see faces. They share my yearning and loneliness. I contort, I bend, I arch, I fall to my knees. Let's just look each other in the eyes. Let's be close. I saw some inconsistency between what was inside and what was outside. If only someone could momentarily penetrate there and become part of my show, I would be understood, accepted, satisfied. One day, my father came into my room and started a conversation. He asked about my studies, my plans, my mood, and suddenly he mentioned Victoria, which made me feign surprise. Inside, I was outraged that he was meddling in things that weren't his concern, but I managed to maintain a quirky lightness, replying, "Dad, you don't get it at all." I don't know why I didn't trust him for the first time and didn't share. Later, I analyzed it and caught myself on the frightening thought that it wasn't just about shyness, but about what? I couldn't understand. At the end of the school year, my dad gave me the keys to a new Jaguar. We went to the garage together, and my eyes filled with tears of happiness, excitement, and joy. The light fell on the shiny red body. The pleasant factory smell of the car was intoxicating. I started the car and just sat inside, listening to music. Less than 3 months remained before I could drive it. For a long time, Victoria was occupied with exams and a trip to another city, and upon her return, I found the strength to organize a small party in our yard. Although I couldn't drive, I wanted to show off the car. I invited her friends and a few mutual acquaintances from the creative school. We were sitting on the edge of the pool, talking, when suddenly Johann appeared in swimming trunks. Victoria immediately stared at his figure, her pupils so dilated. I remember that moment like a scene from a movie. Generally, my brother isn't particularly charismatic, but after long hours coding, he can switch to a playful mode for a while. He greeted everyone comically and jumped into the pool. Our conversation with Victoria was interrupted. She, as if driven by instinct, jumped towards him. Suddenly, a storm rose inside me, scattering sand against the walls of my soul and settling just as quickly. And she always greeted me coldly, especially lately. I remained silent, suppressing my emotions. With a stupid, strained smile, I spent the evening and never spoke to Victoria again. Some horrifying mask of my smile was imprinted on me, and it felt like I saw it every time I approached a mirror, a fool's smile. I wanted to cut my fingers to the bone with thin strings so that the music would be filled with this blood. My spectators give silent approval. What do you all expect from me? They start screaming wildly. There are more and more of them. They are cramped in this black sack, and they beg me to let them out, but I can't find any way for them to escape. I regret not turning to my father and brother. They would have understood me as a man, as an adult. They would have supported me, presented me in a better light. Johann wouldn't have competed with me, and Victoria's ambitions would have been cooled. I'm becoming more secretive and irritable. It's bitter to realize that despite understanding all our family principles and their love for me, I can't open up in return. Hidden face, no concept. First, I play what I was taught by my teachers, 9 viewers. Then I play something of my own, 4 viewers. I improvise, 2 viewers, complete lack of subscriptions. I'm reticent. Compliments on my hands and rings, clothes, well, at least something. Broadcasts become regular, but the number of views doesn't increase. One day, I was drawn to a profile of a girl who visited my stream. Ethereal Vixen _19, an alluring face with effectively wide eyes and black lenses. Her stream had about 1,000 viewers. She was giving a facial massage, then showing off skincare products. I didn't understand why she would spend so much time and effort improving already perfect skin, glowing with youthful beauty. Sometimes she stood up, showing her narrow waist under a black top, and went somewhere. Her legs sank into light pants with stripes that barely stayed on her not-so-wide hips. The chat erupted with animated hearts and stickers. "You visited my stream," I wrote, not noticing how the message got lost in the flood of others. Then she did her makeup, a cold tone, highlighter on the upper cheekbones, the bridge of her nose, and above the upper lip, creating a mysterious glow. I couldn't keep still and kept watching. Some rational part of me whispered, "Turn it off and go do something productive." But I continued to watch as she drew long, precise eyeliner strokes. The pencil outlined the contour of her lips, which seemed so close to me, as if she were breathing on me through the screen. Then the deep, wine-colored lipstick carefully filled the surface of her lips. I sent $50, and she read my message on air. "You visited my stream. Did you like it?" "I don't really remember," she replied, "but thanks for the donation." She made a heart shape with her fingers. I slammed my laptop shut in frustration. The next day, I found myself at the pond. There, I discovered a snipe's nest, and sitting about 8 meters away, observed the 3 chicks. At first, I accidentally startled the parent. The bird flew away, and I felt guilty for my intrusion. But I knew that if I waited and kept still, it would return and might even get used to the observer. Soon, the adult bird reappeared, carrying something edible in its beak. The chicks perked up and began making noises. Their tiny beaks opened wide in anticipation of food. The walk gave me a fleeting sense of reality. I felt as if I had found myself, but as soon as I returned to my usual surroundings, the boredom returned. I was sick of digital self-expression. I was nobody. And in these gaming conditions, I didn't want to be anybody. I was tired of not achieving anything. It felt as though the entire world had been reduced to endless feeds, likes, and subscriptions. And where do I fit in all of this? What should I do? Adapt to social media algorithms and the most obvious needs of viewers. The thought that every action of mine must be filtered through the lens of popularity and trends chokes me. Something constantly dictates what to feel, what to do, and how to think. Being myself is unbearably difficult, and the phone is always at hand. It knows what I've done and what I will do. Ethereal Vixen _19 started a live stream. What the hell? I haven't even subscribed to her. Why am I being notified? On the new stream, she talks about guys and her friends. There are even more viewers. She doesn't seem outright dumb, though today she's talking complete nonsense. Her speech is well articulated, but what attracts me the most are her fingerless gloves, similar to the ones Victoria used to wear. $1,000 is sent to her account from mine, this time with no accompanying message. She squeals, reads my nickname, and thanks me in a very childish manner. Jokes like, "My daddy is in the chat." Some strangers follow me, and later Ethereal Vixen herself. I silently leave the room with a pleasant sense of importance and dignity. After the stream, she messages me first and tries to start a conversation. I respond briefly, but sometimes add messages in a slightly pompous style. I don't reveal any personal details. Age and my interest in music are all she needs to know. I am reserved and cold. She seems interested in me. I feel powerful. About 200 kilometers away from me, nothing to worry about. We exchanged messages for a few days. She replied quickly, tactfully, and pleasantly. In the evenings, I ordered food for her. She tried to find out what else I did besides music, but I didn't know what to answer. When we had a video call, she was initially a bit disappointed. After a while, I realized why. She thought I was significantly older. As she said, in our correspondence, I seemed like an adult hiding my true age. This didn't please me much, but on the other hand, it seemed flattering. Okay, even if I'm nothing in our messages. The communication became even easier. One day, she called me herself and asked if I could send her a bit more cash. I was uneasy, but when she took off her shorts, I couldn't resist. My first sex, virtual, and for money. Almost every night after 11, it repeated, but she no longer overstepped or begged. Only once, on her own initiative, did I order her a tennis skirt and underwear. I knew it was all complete trash. It would only be a matter of time before she needed money again, and if I didn't give it, someone else would. However, it didn't stop us from getting closer. She listened to me play guitar, thoughtfully and with feeling. She liked my clothes, and sometimes there was a magical silence between us, something that never happened with Victoria. You talk and talk, and then suddenly, you're just looking at each other. Through the monitors, like fools, sometimes smiling. A week later, I said to her, "Come over. I'll book a hotel. We'll have a nighttime picnic in the park. And I've wanted to revisit the places where I lived as a child and walked around. I'll show you. I don't want to be there alone. Those streets seem to pull me into loneliness or something else I can't describe. Melancholy?" She agreed. "Next week. Definitely. Just as you want." I order a blanket, a tablecloth, a basket, a bottle of wine. Book the hotel. I feel powerful again. But now it's her power over me. After work, my father stopped by and inquired about my expenses, without any reproach or accusations. I hesitated and tried to avoid answering. I wasn't good at lying. "A girl?" he asked. I nodded. "Isn't it a bit much?" he asked calmly. "I don't know," I replied. "Maybe." Dad patted me on the shoulder and quietly said, "Be careful." On the appointed day, she didn't show up and stopped responding. Anger, despair, sadness, and more anger. A few days later, when she didn't start her stream at the usual time, I began to worry. Could something have happened? No. The next morning, I went to check on the nest to clear my mind. To my dismay, only one chick remained. I wanted to believe that the others had flown away or just scattered around, but I knew that in the wild, not everything goes as planned. And there, I broke down in tears. Something was pulsing inside me, and there it was. I got on my bike and pedaled as hard as I could. I rode and cried until my muscles ached. At home, I searched for her social media through her photos and found many interesting things. Velvet Dream _20, also XXX Mistress, with nauseating webcam leaks. But the worst thing I discovered was her recent story from the Amalfi Coast with some older man. He looked somewhat like my father, only with hangover bags under his eyes. It wasn't as if her face looked happy. She appeared doomed. For a couple of days, I was repulsed by food. I heard my father quietly moving around the house, trying not to disturb me. For the first time in my life, I refused to cook dinner on my schedule and locked myself in my room. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Dad didn't ask anything, but every day reminded me, "Son, if you want, we can talk about everything." But I didn't want to talk. She got back in touch via video after 10 days. She looked terrible, apologized, and cried. Her tears gave me some satisfaction, but it was minimal. I silently listened to her incoherent explanations. It wasn't clear what she wanted to convey or what she needed at all. Deciding to play along, I asked how much money to send her. She said she didn't need anything. I asked where she had been, and she admitted that she had gone on vacation with a suitor. Her honesty won me over. Her trembling voice from my headphones did something to me. I saw her soul, which also had a deep abyss, both enticing and frightening. Just a bit more, and I would want to embrace her, shelter her, protect her, keep her. Then she began to beg me to come to her, immediately. Our conversations became regular again. We watched the movie Picnic at Hanging Rock, listened to music, and fell asleep online together. Each time, she said we needed to be together, that I needed to drop everything and go to her. I understood that my long absence might worry my father, so I tried to downplay her persistent idea and listened to my feelings. The dynamics were not great. I felt like an empty tin can on the sidewalk, blowing in the wind and banging against the curbs. When she said she wanted to see a man who makes decisions, I felt like I was being crushed and dragged along the road with a grinding sound. I took this as a hint about all the men who had been with her. And me, unable even to just show up. I wonder if she's already figured out that I'm a daddy's boy, with nothing of my own. I talked to my father. Of course, his diplomacy didn't allow for outright prohibitions, but he wasn't pleased with my idea of going to see a stranger. Among the formal reasons were my upcoming birthday and the start of the school year. For the first time, he spoke quite directly against my decision, marking some points with red flags. Everything in me took this delicate veto as a strict prohibition, as if I were surrounded by an invisible fence, and all my future steps had become subject to unseen control. I confessed that I loved her, to which my father replied that it wasn't love, but madness. This hurt me and convinced me that we had different views on what was happening. I asked him what love meant to him, and I received the sad answer: "It's hard to define, but you'll find out one day." The words seemed cheap, untimely, and pompous. My 18th birthday was supposed to mark the beginning of new opportunities and changes. However, what I saw beyond it was just a grid of boredom, where every significant event, no matter how promising and grand, only tied me to something and set boundaries. I began to perceive my father as a strict overseer whose friendliness had turned into an impenetrable wall of authority. My perception of him distorted with each passing day. Soft-spoken words now sounded like orders, wrapped in a gentle facade. Inside me, a rebellion was brewing. In the trunk of the car, there are a few things and a guitar. I drove onto the same road I often took to leave the city. At first, everything seemed familiar, every building, every turn of the road. Then the scenery started to change, replaced by new landscapes. In the rearview mirror, everything I had always considered home slowly vanished behind the horizon. The pond, the same lookout with an awkward memory of Victoria. Exactly 1 week until my 18th birthday. I'm driving carefully. The adrenaline from passing police cars is enough. I'm done for if they stop me. A reckless act that feels thrilling in the moment. Some silly test of myself and my father. The new sound system in the car isolates me with its rich sound, playing Hymn Beautiful, and there she is, my dark angel, greeting me in a short black dress, pointing to a parking spot. Her fishnet stockings make my eyes blur. Without turning off the music, and without hiding my poor parking skills, I slowly try to squeeze between the cars. We smile, sizing each other up through the glass. In a few seconds, I'll have my first kiss. Her name is Elizabeth. She rents a modest apartment in the city center and will spend the entire week there, never leaving. On my birthday, we'll fly to Berlin. There will be clubs, bars, fine dining, and a mysterious view from the panoramic windows of a high-rise hotel. At first, my father called me, but I didn't answer. There were a few unpleasant text exchanges with my brother. Only on my birthday did I pick up the phone and accept my father's congratulations. It would have been easier if he had exploded in anger, cursed, and blamed me for everything. In open confrontation, it would have been easier to take decisive action and build justifications. But instead of reproach, I heard wishes for my happiness. There wasn't a hint of sarcasm or a suggestion that I should apologize for my actions. I didn't return home by the start of the school year. A couple of years ago, my dad had bought various cryptocurrencies, and a small portion of them had been sent to my wallet. The tokens were dropping in value every week, but it didn't matter much since they had brought significant returns at the start of the year. I regularly converted and cashed them out. Elizabeth and I rented a modest, but by her standards, nice 2-story apartment. She stopped streaming and spent her free time on online games. I immersed myself in Elizabeth's world, experiencing everything through her lens. All her panic attacks, anxieties, and uncertainties. It seemed like I needed her more than she needed me. Our communication was easy, light. We joked, laughed, talked a lot. But sometimes a sudden melancholy would grip us, as if she were peering into me and discovering my depth. This is what I wanted, my only silent audience. But here's the strange part. Under her gaze, I didn't feel like performing any kind of dance. I felt as though I was stripping down, just like she had stripped down in front of me on camera. I sit down and watch, but I don't know where. At her? At myself? Into the depth? Perhaps all this gloom had a subcultural tinge. We were likely overthinking it, but it seemed to me that Elizabeth harbored the same thing in her soul as I did. Somewhere, her abyss connected with mine. We silently drove through the night city in the car, listening to the National. Sometimes during the day, we would drive to a neighboring city and stroll through a park with heather fields and sandy dunes. The sea was within reach. We sat on the shore, eating cheap sandwiches from the store. The wind played with the sand, creating patterns on its surface as if someone were drawing lines and waves. In the spring, Mia, a friend of Elizabeth's from Israel, who was also a cam girl, came to visit us. She seemed funny and amusing to me. The apartment started swaying from the hangouts. I began meeting new people. They were all very different. I enjoyed playing the role of moderator as the host of the place. Some were immediately blacklisted and not allowed past our doorstep after the first parties, but there were also those who felt comfortable. Later, I noticed that comfort depended on the substances people were using, and I found the greatest compatibility with mephedrone. Unfortunately, board games and consoles didn't work without it anymore. It's not that Elizabeth and I were constantly high, but Mia was at high risk. The risky atmosphere was also due to the fact that meth would sometimes accidentally get scored, and if she had a lot, she was happy to share. Thankfully, a lot didn't happen often. She herself was always in need. I no longer provided her with financial support. In general, money started to run out. Elizabeth said we needed to do something. But what? I didn't understand. The belief that cash could be attracted quickly and effortlessly faded away rather quickly. Because I often dealt with crypto, I didn't feel its connection to real value. For me, they were just numbers that constantly fluctuated when converted to dollars. Perhaps that's why the thought of illegally borrowing a few bitcoins from my father came to me so easily. Fortunately, after several attempts, I realized that it was impossible. He had a high level of cybersecurity, and neither backups nor passwords from his home computers and Wi-Fi router would help me. Elizabeth suggested simply asking. She didn't have a father, so she could talk about this lightly. The narrative she was pushing on me was that I was a grown, independent person. After all, I already had a gap year. Other parents give money for travel, self-development, or even their own startups. Why should I be any different? And so I asked. I told my father that I was going to travel. I said I was going to record an album, that I needed my own studio, a music video, and promo, that I was planning to take courses in sound production, that I was going to go on a cruise. I wanted to learn to manage money and be independent. My father said that I had good plans and that he was ready to support me whenever necessary. All I needed to do was discuss it with him and present the bills. But I didn't want to discuss anything. I said that with this approach, I would constantly feel dependent, so I needed a sum that would allow me to become self-sufficient and no longer ask him for help. There were no negotiations. He took some time to think, or gave me time. and a few days later, silently transferred the money to my bank account. A significant amount. It felt as if I had made a deal, the result of which, despite the success, broke me. My gratitude was insincere, and it was obvious. A good foundation for dialogue with my father had crumbled. He didn't call me. Only after time had passed did I realize that it wasn't about resentment or even giving me the opportunity to repent. It was that any call from him would have continued to bind me. His presence would have loomed over me with a silent demand for accountability. He gave me what I had asked for, freedom. He became almost invisible. A year of senseless flights with Elizabeth, the luxurious malls in Dubai, and expensive entertainment lost their appeal in the heat and adaptation. Then came countless beach days, indistinguishable from each other, in the Maldives. The sea and champagne in Saint-Tropez, surface-level sparkle. My brother was also flying to different cities, but for business visits and conferences. Elizabeth and I were just victims of tourist traps. The very idea of flying to resorts that carried trendy atmospheres seemed archaic to me, but for some reason, we continued to follow it, knowing that each new place promised something unique, yet ultimately added to a collection of useless expenses and wasted time. I wanted to meet someone unusual, inspiring, but the people around us were just like us, either relaxed or workers on vacation. The latter gravitated toward us, thinking we could offer them something. They joined us in visiting the most standard tourist spots, going to bars. In essence, no one was genuinely passionate about anything. All the conversations were about the same things: materialistic fetishes and food narcissism, useless junk from clothes and gadgets, some kind of hopeless routine. I didn't know who to reach out to. During our travels, I realized that when it came to intersecting mindsets with another person, I often got bored, mostly with my own thoughts. In these common settings, nothing interesting was born in me. No questions, no observations, no topics for discussion. It's me, not others. Wherever we went, an annoying noise followed me. Elizabeth preferred Instagrammable places in the city center. I was particularly irritated by the motorcyclists outside the window and the construction work. Soon, I started choosing quieter places myself, but even a high price didn't guarantee freedom from sounds you couldn't predict. There was always something that made me want to run away: the neighbor's noisy lock mechanism or the renovations in the building across the street. I even started using earplugs to sleep. Sometimes I dreamed of being back in my childhood home, opening the window, catching the scent of pine trees, and lying in my bed. There, the singing of birds might be interrupted only by the barely audible clinking of dishes from neighbors having breakfast outside, or the occasional ring of a distant passing cyclist. When the pandemic started and the tourist-crowded streets of Venice emptied out, I felt a sense of relief. We found ourselves locked down in this ancient city. We moved from the hotel to a rented apartment overlooking a canal, and each of our days began with watching the abandoned boats slowly drifting on the water. I didn't want to go anywhere, and I regretted not having a guitar at hand. Elizabeth resumed her streaming, but the streams became more reflective and not as popular as before. Perhaps this was due to my requests to tone down the vulgarity and tastelessness. I had to make an effort not to feel jealous of her admirers. I knew that sooner or later, Elizabeth would leave me. What could keep her was the constant tension, the possibility that I might leave too. I didn't want to build a system of manipulations. If fame and attention from other girls suddenly flooded over me, that might have helped keep her, a rather dubious motivation for my achievements. She's going to leave me one day, I tried not to replay this thought in my head constantly, and I even succeeded, but darkness would claim my light as night fell. I stopped dreaming. Even if I had acquired all the qualities she liked, she would still demand drama, simply because our abysses had merged into a deep volcano's crater, and she still didn't know what to do with this void. Right now, we like it. I suggest we just enjoy it, but Elizabeth sometimes wants to throw stones into it, hoping they'd explode from the high temperatures before they even hit the bottom. I understand her. She likes living with the thought that one day the volcano will start spewing burning lava right onto our heads. But I already like it as it is, eternally sleeping in the fog. When she cheated on me with a man nearly twice her age, I was scared for myself that I'd cause some irrational chaos and be killed by hysteria. But I managed. Unbidden thoughts of my father surfaced, and they somehow supported me. Maybe because I had betrayed him too. When it seemed like I couldn't go on any longer, when my nerves and mind were fraying, I discovered some unshakable foundation within me, laid down by my father. I spoke to Elizabeth calmly, correctly, respectfully, and it hurt her. She hadn't expected that from me. Besides, I realized that all this time we'd been together, she had been feeding off my calmness, and now I saw again that wavering, neurotic girl who used to call me via video chat and cry. I drenched myself in a resinous pride that permeated me and immediately hardened. My main message to the outside world was despair, as if I had already known everything and was disappointed in it all. But I held my head high. I was a sage, observing the apocalypse of souls. I was free from hatred for Elizabeth and any other feelings at all. Gradually, the depth began to fade. I sank into it, less frequently. I enrolled in the Academy of Arts, couldn't make myself study. I tried to save money. Nothing worked because I spent a lot on girls. Professional escorts didn't interest me. My kink list now included cam girls. They combined a wild thirst for freedom with a soulful privacy. They found it hard to distinguish where the show ended and reality began. I blurred that line and sought to get something from them that resembled what I had with Elizabeth. I met them all the same way. First, expensive gifts, then tickets to come see me. Luring them out of the digital world wasn't always easy. Instead of traveling, I now collected countries where my lovers lived: Belgium, Poland, Spain, Italy, Estonia, Russia, Hungary. They stayed with me from 1 week to a month, and I was sure that my approach truly touched them, and meeting me left marks on their souls. I genuinely cared for some of them, and they fell in love with me. All this made me feel like I was giving them more than just gifts and attention. New Year's Eve 2023 wrapped the city in twinkling lights and the scent of spices. I was alone, and I had never felt so lonely. While sending greetings to acquaintances, I struck up a conversation with Mia. She invited me to visit her in Tel Aviv. I immediately jumped at the chance. We reminisced about our life in the 2-story apartment with Elizabeth and marveled at how quickly time flies. The perfect symmetry achieved through plastic surgery gave Mia's face a tired look. Eyes that once sparkled with youthful naivety now appeared lost and seemed to glint with their last bit of energy. Her unyielding optimism was almost eerie, as if she knew she had to be that way, and nothing was ever reassessed. Her lips, corrected by injections, smiled less often. The colorful tattoos had blurred and needed refreshing. We got totally wrecked together like never before, mindlessly and boldly. She was inspired by my start, though she had been sober until then. We avoided sobriety by any means necessary. Following the script of addictive dramas, we comforted each other, trying to stay on the same level. Then we threw parties again, just like in 2018, danced under the stars, feeling limitless and immortal. Everything has its seasons. Spring comes, fresh, bubbling. The present becomes intense and tangible, where everything flows in an unstoppable torrent. Life turns into a kaleidoscope of meetings, emotions, and discoveries. Summer, hot, passionate, polyamorous, where love triangles multiply into polygonal structures, and then autumn, which began with rehab. For my birthday, enough substances were stocked up to ensure continuous fun for several days. The narcotic frenzy was a success. I remember lying in the hallway, clenching my teeth in terror and begging for help. I was provided help at my own expense in a foreign country at the highest rates. A room half the size of my bathroom, IV drips, a psychiatrist addictologist, a support group. I was empty. So empty that I later found out my accounts had been hacked. The main suspects were Mia's friends. There wasn't much left on deposit anyway, so this whole situation just brought me closer to inevitable bankruptcy. Instead of the depth, a dopamine pit, slowly and painfully sucking out all remaining life. In this curse, I force myself to search for even the slightest glimmer of the lost feeling in everything, every action. Another layer of disappointment. I give up. Take me away from here. I raise the white flag and wave it to the heavens. I call my father. The older I got, the harder it was to describe what was happening inside me. The boiling void within me always wanted to burst into the visible world and take shape in words, sounds, forms. That I felt unheard was the least of my problems. But the fact that every attempt to express myself always contained inaccuracies isolated me. Any statement was not it, a forgery. Perhaps that's why I so desperately wanted to shut it all up with drugs. I'm ashamed of the way I speak. After all, language is a reflection of me, and in this imprecise language, I ask for my father's forgiveness as he flies in for my discharge. I understand that my apologies are worthless because my worthless life has cornered me, giving only the illusion of choice where I can ask for help. I have no guarantee that tomorrow I won't think differently, that tomorrow, being dependent on something else, I won't again think about deceiving him. I don't believe in myself, but I believe in him, that he will unconditionally understand and accept me. I believe in the tears of joy with which he greets me. He was always within me. Thanks to him, I find the strength to move forward. I say I need to return to Mia's for my things, but he asks me to forget about them and not worry. We spent a couple of days in a hotel, bought new things, and then rented a pickup truck and went to a festival, just like the good old days. It felt strange to feel like an adult next to him. I looked at him and remembered my childhood, those moments I had almost forgotten, when he taught me how to cast a fishing rod, or when we flew a drone over an abandoned building. Dad would usually put on trance in his headphones to focus on programming. I remember how he would become motionless, and it seemed like the music came to life in his fingers, which, separate from the rest of his body, would start dancing on the keyboard. I never encountered this music anywhere else. Now it blasted from a powerful sound system, and Dad, nodding his head, watched the floating laser patterns on the hanging dome. We could forget ourselves together again. All the healing reconciliation was in the sounds, in the rhythms, in the silence. It seemed to me that this was the best place for our unity, where no one asked questions or judged. Our new large tent, with 2 entrances, reminded me of the one we had at the festival in Hungary. The fresh air and my antidepressant lulled me into a deep sleep. I was awakened by strange movement, and after removing my earplugs, I realized that my father had rushed outside. When the shooting began, he threw my sneakers inside and crouched next to me. I heard people screaming and saw blood oozing from my father's wrist. He ordered me to open the opposite entrance of the tent without making any noise. Someone was approaching our camp. My father pointed to the entrance and whispered, "Run." I was paralyzed with fear. My father gripped my shoulder tightly, smearing me with blood, then looked into my eyes and sternly repeated, "I said, run." I obeyed, instinctively, as a small child would. When I bolted out and crouched low to the ground, covering a few meters, my father stood up and dashed toward the direction from which the voices were coming. At that moment, more shots were fired. I ran through the grove without looking back, not slowing down. The gunfire intensified and echoed from different directions. In the field, my path was guided by the flow of others who were also fleeing. My breath became more labored, and my chest burned. It felt like I was suffocating. I ran on sand and stones for more than half an hour. I never knew I could do that. My eyes were locked on the horizon, swaying with every step. I took a deep breath, thinking it might be my last. My chest expanded. Before my eyes, the depth flared up again. It filled with fire, and I no longer understood whether I was running into it or it was rushing toward me. The fire washed over my face without burning. It seeped into my lungs, cooling them and helping me breathe. As I leaped, the boundary between sky and earth blurred. I knew I had to keep going through the desert. My salvation was there. Or was it already within me? The fatigue faded, and energy surged back with new strength. Andrey Vismut, dedicated to my father, with eternal love and remembrance. The music was generated and selected by the author. If you enjoyed the audiobook, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave your feedback. It will inspire me to create new stories.